For all intents and purposes, good morning, everybody. This will be the Public Safety Committee hearing. I'm Jack Weiss. I'm joined by Greg Smith. I am informed that neither Mr. Zine nor Mr. Parks will be attending today, even though we put on the calendar one of Mr. Zine's motions. What we have on consent, or potentially on consent, Mr. Smith, item 4, which is a crime lab grant. Item 5, it's a DUI grant. Item 6, a COPS grant. Item 7, clear grant. Item 8, a fire department donation. Item 9 is a DART report. Ms. Stengel, is that for consent or for discussion?
Yeah, I can go on consent, sir.
There's an amendment, I understand, but my question to Mr. Smith is, out of all of those, are there any that you would like to?
You hit 100%. I had questions on number 9, though.
Okay, well, so number 9 will hold for presentation. The other items, Mr. Smith and I will recommend to the full council that they be approved. So if you're here on the other items, thank you for coming, and no need to hang out here any longer. Mr. White, why don't you call the first 3 items together, the DNA items, and but we'll begin, as we always do, with our weekly report.
Item 1, Police Department to present verbal report relative to the status of DNA testing, backlog, and cold hits. Item 2 is motion Zion, Rosendahl, Garcetti, directing the Police Department to report relative to the administrative errors that caused a United States Department of Justice grant award to be reduced by nearly $500,000. Item 3, Board of Police Commissioners and CAO reports relative to grant application regarding the 2008-09 Forensics DNA Backlog Reduction Program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Sanchez-Owens.
Good morning, Yvette Sanchez-Owens, LAPD Scientific Investigation Division. I'll give my weekly report on our rape kit status. We currently have 7,374 cases in our backlog. That's actually down 8 this week from last week. That number is comprised of 199 cases that have been requested for analysis but are not yet complete, 302 cases that are other cases that are not necessarily rape that have been requested for analysis and also are not complete, and then the balance is kits that have never been requested for analysis, and that totals 6,873 cases. So far this year, we've booked into property since January 1st, 694 cases. That's 15 higher than last week. 460 of those have not yet been requested for analysis. So far to date, we've assigned 518 cases for analysis this year. 428 have been screened, 161 are currently in the screening process, and 137 are currently in profiling. So far this year, we have had 189 case-to-offender notifications.
Thank you for that, and we're being joined by Councilmember Reyes. Every week, we get a presentation from you on the extent of the backlog and where things are in the process. One thing that I would be curious about is there any are there any changes in the amount of time that it takes to test kits these days as opposed to before? Are you, in terms of once something is requested, once it's in the queue, is the queue longer, shorter, or the same as it ever was?
Yeah.
Mr. Matheson.
Greg Matheson, Laboratory Director, Los Angeles Police Department. I'm not sure there's a very easy answer to that. Like most of there's a lot of factors associated with it. I do know we are completing a lot more cases than we were this time a year ago. And if the request rate has stayed the same, that means the queue or the amount of time has probably stayed pretty consistent. But as the capacity within our laboratory goes up, the turnaround time will start decreasing if it hasn't already. I just don't have that figure in front of me.
Got it. Well, thank you for that report. Is there anything else on the weekly report that you need to add, or is that?
No, we're doing really good on the donation money that you gave us. We've already tested 99 kits. We have 12 cases currently in progress under that money, and 87 so far have been screened. And we have 57 that were tested positive, and we have 5 cases pending CODIS review.
I'm having a hard time hearing.
Oh, sorry. I'll start
So
over.
99,
We've tested 99 cases. We currently have 12 in progress. 87 have been screened. 57 were positive and submitted for profiling. We have 5 cases in review for upload into CODIS. So we're doing quite well with that many, and we appreciate that.
good. Anything else, Mr. Matheson?
Let's just say, maybe as a reminder and clarification, historically, the amount of cases or the kits that we have that provide some sort of DNA evidence of the perpetrator of the crime sits somewhere between 50 and 60%. So the cases that we have been analyzing under your grant, I think you mentioned that there was about 87 or so that have been completed so far, with 50.
About half tested positive for.
Actually, a little bit more than that. We're running probably a little closer to 60% on this particular set of cases that gave us something that we could move on to DNA profiling. And those are being uploaded, and we'll see how the results come out on.
Thank you. Colleagues, Mr. Reyes, there are 3 DNA items on the agenda today. The first item is the weekly report, which is what Ms. Sanchez-Owens just provided us with. And then there is a motion regarding the $500,000 grant money that was not received by the city. And then there's another grant issue. On this particular aspect of it, are there any questions? No. Okay. Then moving on to item 2.
Good morning, council members. My name is Rhonda Sims-Lewis, representing the Los Angeles Police Department. This morning, we appear before you to give you a full accounting of what took place with the DNA backlog grant and the possible loss of the $500,000 in a future grant. In addition, what we think is really important is that we want to give you a full accounting of the measures that we've put in place to ensure that this never happens again. I have with me, you're very familiar with Yvette Sanchez-Owens, who is the CEO of our SID, our Scientific Investigation Division, and also Ms. Laura Filotoff, who is the Commanding Officer of Fiscal Operations. So we're going to talk to you about what happened. We're going to talk to you about what we've done, put in place so that it doesn't happen again. We're going to outline for you where we are currently with our DNA processing and where we hope to be in the future, depending on future funding. And then lastly, we need your help with a couple of things that would affect this. Firstly, we're currently showing a deficit in our civilian salary account, and that deficit is completely due to the fact that there were going to be mandatory furloughs, and the money that we should not have had to spend due to those mandatory furloughs was taken out of our budget. We understand those mandatory furloughs will not be taking place. So we were $5.1 million was taken out of our account for those furloughs. So we're seeking to get that money back, and that would help us to hire the 16 DNA-related positions we have in this year's budget that were not funded.
Right. And the council president and I are already working on that.
Okay.
Now, on this issue, Ms., the motion regarding the $500,000. So I thought you wanted to present on.
We would. There was just one other thing that we'll need help with on the 16 positions so that we can continue to address this, and that would be the unfreezes related to 3 positions that we have in our grant unit that are vacant that we need to fill so we can continue to ensure that these kind of things don't happen in the future.
Morning,
Okay.
Ms. Filotoff.
Good morning. Laura Filotoff, Commanding Officer, Fiscal Operations Division. I want to give you a brief summary or a summary of what happened as far as the $500,000 that affected the 2008 backlog, DNA backlog grant, and then also what measures we've taken to prevent that from ever happening again with both this grant and all of our other grants that we administer. Basically what happened is that the DOJ takes a snapshot in time when they make the assessment on the DNA grants. Those are formula grants that are given to the department, given to various jurisdictions based on the amount of money that's available to the federal government. At the time that they made the decision on the 2008 grant, we had substantially spent approximately 99% rather of the 2004 and the 2005 grant. We had not closed those grants out, and we had not started spending on the 2006. And by spending, I mean had not started drawing down those funds. Money actually had been obligated against those grants. Tests were being done. They were in the pipeline. But from DOJ's point of view and the snapshot that they take, it had to do with what they were looking at, which was the drawdowns that we've done from the federal government on those grants. So at that time, like I said, we had not closed out those two grants, and we had not officially started spending against the 2006 grant. So they looked at it for the 2008 allocation, and they said that they wanted us to basically catch up, and so they made the allocation on the 2008 grant, which is item 3 on today's committee agenda. They made that allocation of the amount of the 2006 grant. So they're always looking at a previous year's grant to make determinations about a future year grant. They did this also this is a practice that they had not done to us before. They did it to us in 26 other jurisdictions this year. So it was something that was done nationally on these grants. But I want to give you I want to tell you now where we are today. We've done a number of different things to ensure that this never happens again. Part of the problem we had was in communication. Clearly, we had some problems in communication and supervision on these grants. So we have developed, and it's already in place, a comprehensive database that lets all the users know where we are on all aspects of all of our grants. This will for example, let the people at SID know where we are in terms of expenditures and drawdowns on the grants so that they can plan what grant we're using, and that all the staff, including the supervision within the grants unit and myself, know where we are as far as the expenditures and the drawdowns. The other thing we have done is we've developed a roadmap, which we've given you a copy
I
of.
just ask clarification. When you say communication supervision, are you speaking of from the federal to the local or within your own administration?
Both.
Both?
Unfortunately, what was occurring was that the grants analysts were each working on their own grants. They were communicating with the project manager from DOJ or the grant specialist that we work with on that particular grant, but that information wasn't being filtered to the supervision. And so a lot of past practices had been occurring. Like I mentioned, they had never done this to us before. So, in terms of reducing the allocation, so there wasn't that sense of urgency to close the grant. There was the urgency on spending the money. It was being spent, and tests were being done. We were spending general fund dollars and grant fund dollars, but the grants had not been closed out. So that will never happen again, those communication lapses, okay? Everybody is very clear on what information needs to be communicated both up and down and across and to DOJ and to our partners that we administer the grants with, okay? It's good. Does that answer your question? Okay. We're also going to be, or have been doing, and will continue to be doing specific training on grants, both to the department in general, so people kind of have a sense of what grants are all about within the police department, and then to our recipient divisions who have received grants, so they understand the process, and then internally for the grant staff, more comprehensive training in terms of what their responsibilities are in timely processing, timely closeouts, timely drawdowns, reporting, all of those things that are important to all of the different grants. I also want to let you know that the 2004 and the 2005 grants are closed. We have expended 99% of the 2006 grant. We have, from the DOJ's perspective, it's 85% because that's how much we've drawn down. but we have the remainder amount, less $61 of that grant, that is in the pipeline. You know, the SID has done the testing, we're waiting for invoices to pay. Once they've been paid, then we can draw down the funds from the federal government. So this, like I said, the 2006 will be closed out early next month, and then we will start spending on the 2007 grant. We are allowed to spend the equipment portion of that now, which we're doing, and then once we get the go-ahead from DOJ, we'll start spending the 2007, and then the 2008, which again is before the committee today, we can't start spending that money until October, which is the beginning of the federal fiscal year. So that gives you an idea of where we are on the spending and what happened.
Mr. Smith?
What are the deadline windows on the 2007 grant? How long can you go to bill on it?
They're 2-year grants. We can continue to spend on those grants. But we're going to have our goal is to have the 2007 closed by the end of December. We know that they'll be looking at the 2007 expenditures for the 2009 allocation. We expect to have that money spent by the end of December, and they start looking at in January to March is when they start doing the allocations. So when they look at the 2009, there won't be money there for them to, you know, they'll be seeing that we've made full expenditures.
But there was already a reduction in the 2008 predicated on the spending patterns from the
2006, yes.
So we're on that down slope. Can you ever get it back up?
Yes. Again, you mean in terms of the allocation?
If they're predicating each year's allocation on your previous performance and we went down,
No.
can you bring that performance back up to a point that they'll give you more later on?
No, what they did was the federal government had a fixed amount of money. They allocate that to the states. Then there's a formula that's determined amongst the labs in terms of, I think it's Part 1 crimes, that are, the money is distributed to the various labs based on their percentages of Part 1 crimes. So that's where that $500,000 figure comes in. We would have gotten another $500,000, but when the allocations that the state made went back up to DOJ, they said, well, hold on a second, LAPD hasn't spent the 2006, so they reduced our allocation. Next year, when they're doing the allocation for the 2009, they will see that we have spent, but again, it'll be based on formula. So it goes back to the same old formula, and because there was money that they took away from us in 27 other jurisdictions actually got more than the formula would have given them. So hopefully other jurisdictions will fall short from our perspective, and we'll get more money in the 2009.
And the Part 1 crime statistics, is that LA City's Part 1 crimes or a percentage of statewide Part 1 crimes?
The federal government has whatever fixed number of funds available to distribution to the states. They divide it with each state depending on the Part 1 crimes within the state.
Within the state.
So California gets whatever percentage of the Part 1 crimes in the U.S. that occurred in California get that money.
Okay.
Then within the state, each of the jurisdictions that has a criminalistics laboratory in it figure out what the amount of Part 1 crime is, what the percentage is within the state, and then that's the percentage of the state allocation that each agency receives.
Anyway, what I'm getting to is the likelihood then is because we continue on a downward slope in Part 1 crime, and our spending was down in that previous year, we cannot expect to see it rise above 435 probably.
It'll be based on Part 1 crime, not on spending, because we will have spent the grant. So they won't have anything to ding us.
So that part of it.
That part.
But the problem is we're already on that down slope, so you can't spend more than you got.
But
So
we've been in,
stuck at that minimum number doesn't change. And the only criteria that could change would be the Part 1 crimes, which can go up or down. But you're not going to, even if it goes up, you're not going to get more than that base number, right?
we've been in communication with DOJ at the highest levels of our organization. We've made it clear to them what the problem was with this, that it was a snapshot in time that they took to determine our 2008 funds. They understand that those expenditures were being made, even though we hadn't billed for it yet. So they have made it clear to us that we can recover from this in future years. So I think it's going to be really important, like you said, that our communication be strong between DOJ and internally in our department. So we're going to continue to communicate with them that we have an additional need over and above what our funding was for 2008.
But for budgeting purposes, on a go-forward basis, a CAO should really plug in the 435 number and not expect more, and if we get more, great. The chance of getting above that is more difficult, probably.
The 2007 grant is over $800,000, and what they've done is they are combining the DNA piece and the capacity piece. The capacity is, the ability to buy equipment and pay for overtime and those kinds of things. And they're allowing the jurisdictions to fund what they feel is, is important, what their needs are. They don't want to dictate for the jurisdictions. But our expectation, and in our conversation with the DOJ over this matter, is they expect us to recover.
More, yeah.
I don't think that that's an accurate assumption that we're going to be pegged at a lower number now. It's purely a function of the amount of money that's available and the rate of Part 1 crimes as compared to all the jurisdictions. We're not going to be dinged because of our lack of closing that previous grant or starting to operate off the 2006 grant,
Okay.
as long as we show that we're spending the money, which we are going to be able to clearly demonstrate.
All right. And the last thing, how many people do you have in the grants unit now?
I have 11 allocated. I have 7 people there now.
7 of 11?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ray?
So when we talk about additional staff, you speak about solutions, but did I hear you correctly in saying that there's also an internal adjustment that has to happen within management in terms
Definitely.
That's
of the culture within the staff?
the grants, on the grant side. Yes.
So instead of, in other words, your loops have to be a lot shorter and tighter in how you communicate and send your
Yes.
documentation to the federal government. And that's what hurt us, or was it the lack of personnel, or both?
Yeah, I think it was a combination. What we believe is that this system that will communicate throughout the supervisors and the analysts that are actually managing the grants and our end users like SID and like Homeland Security, all the people we help manage these grants with, that system is going to help us to all stay in continuous communication with one another, knowing the status, hopefully real time as we can get it, of the grants, the expenditures, so that and the billing, so that it's well coordinated in the future. Instead of analysts working individually, we'll all be communicating.
It'll be more of a team effort.
Yes.
Everyone will see the same deadlines.
Yes,
Everyone will know which format and all that good stuff.
exactly.
Okay.
We appreciate the report, and we will note and file it, and it just stay in committee, Mr. White. I'm not in a position to point fingers, and I don't want to. I appreciate the how seriously the leadership of the police department clearly took the issue once it was discovered, and I appreciate the decisions that you all have made to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And I appreciate that, and I accept what you and the chief and the deputy chief and everyone has said, which is that this is at least now a priority, and you won't let this happen again. And I want to thank you for that. On item 3, which is the going forward grant, is there a presentation as well?
Good morning, Jason Killeen, Office of the CAO. The Police Department is requesting authority to accept the 2008-2009 Forensic DNA Backlog Reduction Program Grant Award in the amount of $435,860 and to execute a cooperative agreement between the City of Los Angeles and the United States Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice for the period of October 1st, 2008 through March 31st, 2010. Under the cooperative agreement, the National Institute of Justice will reimburse the city for expenses incurred to reduce the DNA backlog by 530 cases. The recommendations in the report comply with the city's financial policies in regards that one-time revenue will be used to cover one-time expenses.
Okay, any questions on the item? Okay, before we take action on all of the items, we have a public comment card from Sarah Tofty from Human Rights Watch. If Ms. Tofty, if you could come forward, and just to let everybody know who participates in this issue, in case you don't know, people of the City of Los Angeles are very fortunate that Human Rights Watch has made it a major project of theirs to look into the issue of the DNA backlog in LA City, LA County, and I guess nationally. It's not a pretty picture, which is what I've been saying for some time, and which frankly is the report we get every week. It's an honest and fair report from Ms. Sanchez-Owens, but it still has a 7 in front of it and 3 zeros after it. And that's shameful, and we're really delighted. I'm delighted, Ms. Tofty, that you've been doing the work you've been doing, and really appreciate that you're here to make a presentation to us this morning.
Yes, thank you very much.
You need to speak into the mic.
This microphone?
Yeah.
Yes, I thought I was, but I guess I have a bit of a cold, so I apologize. I'm with Human Rights Watch. My name is Sarah Tofty, and as Councilmember Weiss noted, we are researching the rape kit backlog nationwide, including a focus on Los Angeles, both Los Angeles, the LAPD, and the LA Sheriff's Department. And one of the reasons we're focusing on Los Angeles is that it's sort of a unique jurisdiction in that it has been acknowledged among the LAPD that there is a problem, and we have a number on the problem, but that number continues to grow. When I was here in May, I think the number was 7,200, and as we just heard now, it's 7,300 something. So the backlog is growing. And one, I want to commend the LAPD for applying for things like the federal grant program. There are a lot of eligible public crime labs that don't apply for this kind of grant funding at all. So they must be commended for the fact that
There are really a lot of labs that don't?
Yes, not all those that are eligible are applying for the funding. So I think that the LAPD needs to be commended for going out there and getting that funding. And now it's important to monitor how they're using it and make sure they're using it appropriately. And I only have 30 seconds, I know, but okay. But for us, where I'm based in New York City had a rape kit backlog of about 17,000 untested rape kits in 1999. And the mayor and the police chief at the time and the crime lab made a decision to make eliminating that backlog a priority. And so by 2003, they had eliminated the number of untested rape kits that were sitting in police storage. Now, some may say that New York City still has technically a rape kit backlog because it does take 30 to 60 days for a rape kit to, once it's submitted or booked into evidence, to really start the testing process. So there is a bit of a backlog, but there are no more untested rape kits sitting in police storage in New York City. So I know it's possible to eliminate a rape kit backlog.
Can you tell us, sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
17,000 kits in 1999. What happened?
How did they get to that number?
How did they erase that number?
How did they erase it? It was a combination of a lot of things, similar to, I think, some of the stuff that the LAPD is talking about or has written up in plans. At the time, it was Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, and controlling crime was a huge priority, like it is for, I'm sure, all mayors, but he had a very strong public image as someone who crime was his sort of number one priority. And so I think the leadership in some ways came a lot out of the mayor's office. The mayor, from my conversations that I've had with, prosecutors who were there at the time, police officials and crime lab officials, really the message came down from the mayor's office that this backlog was unacceptable. And so the city council appointed some money. They did use some private donations, and they also got a little bit of federal funding. But a big bulk of their money came from the city budget. And then they outsourced with a private lab who gave them, I think the deal was about a rate of $500 per rape kit testing. And so they outsourced it. But then, of course, as you all know, they had to build crime lab capacity because outsourcing only gets you so far. Once you've gotten those test results, you need to have public employees who can verify those test results and upload them into CODIS, which is one concern we have. it's really great to hear that, as I think the LAPD presented a little bit earlier, that the citizens of LA are really responding to the LAPD's or Chief Bratton's request for some private funding from LA citizens to get rid of the rape kit backlog, which I think really shows the fact that these citizens are responding with donations shows that eliminating the rape kit backlog is a big priority for the citizens of Los Angeles. But there are limitations to using private funding. It can only get you so far. Now, it may be an important part of the piece, but another really important part of the piece is getting this funding in place. Whether that leadership, that funding part needs to come from the mayor's office, from Chief Bratton, from City Council, getting the funding for these 16 authorized positions in the LAPD crime lab for criminalists, so that we can get the people that we are going to need to verify test results that the LAPD may get if they outsource some of these cases, to verify those so that we can put them into CODIS so you can get the cold hits that you want to bring an offender to justice.
What do you want to? You're probably in the middle of your research, so I don't want to. The answer could be you're in the middle of your research. Are there any preliminary thoughts or findings that you have about the issue based on what you've done so far, or do you want to tell us when you're ready to tell us?
Well, I think I'll have more to say, but I'm happy to share what we have right now. I think for us, like I said, we're focusing both on in this area, we're focusing both on the LAPD and the LASD. And again, I think the LAPD needs to be commended because they have been transparent about the fact that they have a backlog, and they have counted that backlog, and they come before you every week or every 2 weeks, and they account for it. And that situation's a little bit different with the LASD. They probably have just as big of a backlog, if not bigger, but as of yet, they haven't really accounted for that backlog. And so for us, an important part of our report is to get some more real backlog numbers from the LASD. So for us, we had been hoping to have our report out by October or November, but it just depends on when we can get the LASD to respond to our public records requests. And we don't give up very easily, and we're very tenacious, so we're going to assume that we're going to get those numbers, but it may take a few months or a little while. In terms of the LAPD, like I said, what makes them unique, we're studying this issue all across the country. This is a nationwide problem. Some experts estimate that there are at least 400,000 untested rape kit backlogs sitting in either police evidence storage or crime labs. And so what we think, though, makes the situation with the LAPD unique, again, is that they've acknowledged that they have a backlog, but it continues to grow. And they've talked about plans they have, and we think they're good plans, but we want to see those plans put into action. And so regardless of when our report actually comes out, I guess the messages from us is that we're going to continue to do advocacy, we're going to continue to do monitoring, we're going to continue to put any kind of pressure we can put on the situation until we see this backlog eliminated. Because we know it's possible, it's happened in other jurisdictions, and we think it'll happen here.
Well, I very much appreciate that, and I'm going to keep doing everything I can until we get those positions funded and more positions funded, because I personally believe that while donations are good from the private or from my office account or whatever, and while outsourcing is a good thing, the real policy answer to the question is to prioritize science as much as patrol officers in the future and hire scientists, not just cops. And that if you plan your police department that way, you will solve old violent crimes and solve the ones that are coming in and prevent new ones, because you'll take these largely repeat offenders off of the streets. And I acknowledge the need for outsourcing. Indeed, I'm funding some of it, but that really isn't it's not the correct long-term answer. Now, are there any questions for Human Rights Watch? Well, appreciate your being here today and look forward to having you back again.
Thank you.
Thank you. So on the items, Mr. White, we had our usual report on item 1. We'll note and file item 2, and we will approve item 3 and send it on.
Thank you.
Okay. I believe that is the public safety agenda.
Number 9.
Mr. 9, oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Smith for number 9. And then we're going to do the fire item. So item 9, please. Start team.
Just a quick question. Just save you the trouble, just ask the question. You want to do that?
What's that?
Save the trouble, just ask the question?
Yeah, do it.
Question was this money not swept in the budget reallocation at the end of the fiscal year? The money you've identified here in the report, the $115,000 was reappropriated from the 07-8 fiscal year budget.
Correct.
That money was not swept, June?
The request was to reappropriate as opposed to sweep it.
Your names, please.
But it was,
Sorry. Melissa Fleming with the CAO.
okay, but it was not swept, because normally we do sweep those.
That's correct.
So this money was waiting to be allocated to something else that didn't get used, and now you're reallocating that money then?
Correct.
So it didn't get swept?
Correct.
So we're not double spending it?
Correct.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
Okay, with that, can we approve the item, Mr. Smith? Okay, we'll approve the item, and now we're going to be, so you're done. You did it. Thank you.
John White, City Clerk, I believe the CAO presented an alternative set of recommendations for item number 9. Do you want to approve those?
Approve the new CAO recommendations.
Thank you.
And on item 3, I want to clarify that we will receive and file the July 3rd CAO report and instead adopt the recommendations in the July 23rd CAO report for those of you keeping score at home. Now we're going to move from the Public Safety Committee to the joint meeting of the Public Safety Committee and the Audits Committee,
But they're not here.
except that the Chair of the Audits Committee had a personal emergency this morning. Member of the Audits Committee, Mr. Zine, is not here,
Well, we can't act then.
and Ms. Gruhl isn't here. Well, we can have the Public Safety
We can
Committee
do our
hear the
portion.
report. I mean, I think it's a verbal report. It's a verbal report on status that we can hear because it's agendized for the Public Safety Committee.
Then they'll have to meet separately.
So forget that part about a joint meeting.
Can you?
We're just still meeting.
Continuation,
It's
another meeting.
is that okay?
If John says it's okay, it's okay.
All right, John says okay. So, let's go to the fire meeting, and Chief Mack and anyone else who is presenting, feel free to come forward. Mr. White, why don't you say those things that, and Commissioner President Hadley Head.
Item 1, verbal report from the Fire Department relative to the department's proposed Professional Standards Division. Items 2, Personnel Department, Board of Fire Commissioners, and Controller reports relative to the Fire Commission Action Plan. Item 3, motion Han Parks Perry instructing the CLA and the CAO to report on the steps necessary to create an Inspector General position within the Board of Fire Commissioners. Item 4, Personnel Department report and the CLA2 report relative to a top-to-bottom process flowchart of the department's existing disciplinary policies and practices pursuant to motion Weiss-Gruhl, pardon me. Item 5, motion Smith-Zine, instructing the CLA and CAO to report on recommendations to provide increased leadership training for the fire department's command structure. And item 6, personnel reports in response to motion Zine, Perry, Mizikowski relative to an audit of fire department reaction, selection, and employment practices.
You know you're doing work around here when you're hearing a Mizikowski motion. With that, we have Commissioner, we have Chief. I'll let you decide who wants to speak first and what you all want to say. Take it away.
I think what should happen is Chief Mack and Chief Terraza should speak first about the Professional Standards Division, and then I will talk to you about the independent assessors
Thank you.
position.
Perfect.
Okay.
The Chief.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, appreciate being here this morning to give you a status update. The department is making good progress in the development of the Professional Standards Division following the charges that were given to it at the onset, coming from the audit that was done over a year ago. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Terrazas, who can give you the current status of the numerous projects that he's moving forward on at this time. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ralph Terrazas, Assistant Chief, currently assigned to Professional Standards Division. I'm here to give you a verbal update on PSD. The most recent additions to our division have included staffing. We have a recently just hired the Assistant Professional Division, Standards Division Assistant Commander. He was here 3 weeks ago. So his input has been invaluable. He does have a legal background, so it's another sounding board to deliberate. It has confirmed the direction of some of our decisions and caused us to rethink others. The other staffing issue I'd like to bring up is that we recently hired our management analyst too that's going to manage our complaint tracking system. We've made significant progress on the complaint tracking system, and I'll go more into that shortly. Just 2 weeks ago, we completed the interviews for our Special Investigator 2s. We're going to hire 3 of those. That will allow us to partner up with our sworn people, a civilian staff, a permanent staff, with expertise investigations so that we can do much more comprehensive and professional investigations. So we're making progress in the staffing area. Beyond staffing, we're doing a lot of things. Number one change from previous to the establishment of PSD has been one point of control for discipline. Prior to PSD, discipline decisions were made throughout the department. Now we are the single point of control. Helping us in that arena are the disciplinary guidelines. The guidelines that were agreed upon by management and labor tell us what the range is for a penalty by a specific offense. To date, we have had 75 Skelly cases, and every one of those decisions in terms of the number of days off, if any, have been within the guidelines. So that's consistency. Moving on, we've also taken the recommendations of the Personnel Department's report in that we separate the fact-finding part of our investigation with the analysis. Now our advocates concentrate on getting all the facts. They present a report to their boss. That's the first level of analysis to determine whether there's a violation of policy or not. Then I get the report to me, and I do the same thing. I do my own analysis. I look at the reports and determine is there a violation of policy or not. And if so, is it a clear one? So I think we're making better decisions for that reason as well. In the area of training, we've attended a lot of training sessions provided by LAPD Internal Affairs, by the Personnel Department, and various seminars. So our staff within PSD is achieving a higher level of training than we've ever had within the department on the issue of discipline. We've taken that training and we've provided that training to members of our department, to those members who volunteered to become potential investigators for PSD. We just completed that training in July of this year. It was a 40-hour class, and we modeled it after the LAPD model. We've gotten some very good feedback on that, and we're tailoring that training to provide 8-hour training to all supervisors during the month of November. When we're done with that training in November, all officers within the department will be familiar with the new procedures for handling disciplinary investigations, as well as our new complaint tracking system. In addition to being reactive, we're attempting to do some proactive measures to prevent discipline from ever occurring. One of the first things we've done is create a DVD where we replicated 6 different scenarios which we see as the common issues we're seeing in PSD. That DVD will be distributed to all work locations throughout the city, and the intent is to provide a tool for the station commanders to discuss these issues with their commands in an attempt to prevent disciplinary events from ever happening. That is something we've never done before. The second component to our proactive measure is the establishment of the Workforce Excellence Unit. And basically that is HR people who are tasked with assessing dysfunctional work environments and coming up with some solutions prior to ever having a disciplinary issue arise. That's something that we've never done before. Moving on to the next topic is our complaint tracking system. We are currently testing it on a limited basis right now. We're developing modifications as the test proceeds. We've been testing it for about 30 days. Our goal is to go department-wide December 1st after we complete the training that I spoke about earlier. We're getting very good feedback. We're making modifications almost on a daily basis so that when we do roll it out, it'll be a smooth transition. The complaint tracking system, the benefits of that will be a faster notification of disciplinary events, accountability in terms of who will be doing the investigation, faster investigations in that they will normally be completed within 14 days, a centralized system so that we capture all complaints in an electronic database, and the ability to file a complaint through the intranet from any department computer or through the internet from any computer anywhere. In sum, we have made incremental positive progress since January. We still have a long way to go. We're learning a lot, we're modifying as we go, but I think in the end, we'll have been proud to make this decision to have created PSD. That's my verbal report on progress. I did forget to introduce my assistant. If I could have Mr. Hayashida please stand. That's Paul Hayashida. He's newly appointed. He is the number 2 in charge of Professional Standards Division. He has an extensive background in labor law. He's a former police officer, retired from Glendale Internal Affairs. He is an attorney. He also worked for LAPD Inspector General's office. And he comes to us most recently from the State Department of Corrections Inspector General office. As I said earlier, he's been a tremendous resource in the 3 weeks that he's been here, and I look forward to having even greater contributions made by Paul in the future. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for that, and he comes well recommended. Commission
I just want to
President.
make one comment to add to what Chief Terrazas has said to the committee. We recently had a complaint that came into the commission. And just so that you can understand that there is actually we now have a concrete demonstration. The complaint was put into the new tracking system from the commission, sent over to PSD. The commission staff member got a response, used the system the way the system was supposed to be used, and now not because it was a complaint that had to do with EEO issues, which have to do with the commission. We've discovered that we now also will be able to track how long it's taking to investigate it, so that one of the things that I wanted the committee to know was that, as Chief Terrazas has explained, we do have a long way to go, but the portal, from our perspective, is working. I know that they are working on it, but sometimes it really helps if you can have a concrete example of how that's working as opposed to how it was working in the past, in terms of really and truly is it transparent, really and truly does the member get information, really and truly does the member know where their complaint is in the system. And so from the commission standpoint, we have actually seen that work.
Before we get to the questions, we do have a representative of the Chief Officers Association, Mr. Miller. Why don't you come forward and provide us with your statement, and then once we've done that, then let's go to questions. Morning, Mr. Miller.
Good morning, council members. Thank you for the opportunity. As you said, my name is John Miller. I'm the president of the Chief Officers Association and a member of the Stakeholders Working Group. As you're all aware, and the reason we're here is because the City Controller and the Personnel Department identified 4 major areas of deficiency within the department: leadership, communications, discipline, and recruit training. On a positive note, we've seen progress in some of the identified areas. Regrettably, we do not believe and are disappointed that there has not been adequate progress in the area of discipline. As Commission President Hudley Hayes said, and Chief Terrazas mentioned, we have a long way to go, and I do agree with that. There will be a need for continuous change, continuous involvement, and an ability to strive to improve. But I'd like to share with you some of the concerns from members of my organization. On January 1st, 2008, the Firefighters' Bill of Rights became effective. This shouldn't have come as a surprise to anybody. Unfortunately, 9.5 months after the implementation of the labor law, the department has failed to update its obsolete pre-existing policies and incorporate changes required by the Firefighters' Bill of Rights. Correspondingly, LAFD administration has also failed to prepare supervisors, all supervisors, to appropriately address all aspects of internal personnel investigations. On March 13, 2008, the Chief Officers Association forwarded a formal letter to document significant concerns regarding the aforementioned administrative failures. To date, the department has not adequately trained the majority of our first and second level supervisors those individuals who will ultimately be conducting the majority of the intricate LAFD personnel complaint investigations. As you heard Chief Terrazas say, his staff went to 40 hours of training, and now we're going to reduce this down to 8 hours to our first-level supervisors who are going to be responsible for conducting these personnel investigations. Appropriate procedures, protocols, expectations, guidelines, roles, responsibilities, investigative techniques, etc., relative to conducting fair and objective personnel investigations have not yet been addressed. I've always been a belief that during the stakeholder meetings, the number of past disciplinary cases represented by both the Department and Labor was underestimated and misleading. I don't think it was misleading on purpose. I think it was just a result of our past administration's philosophy on discipline. Currently, we're now seeing a more accurate representation of the number of cases handled or adjudicated by Professional Standards Division, which is causing an increased backlog, resulting in further problems brought to the forefront by members of the Chief Officers Association. The lack of trained investigative personnel exacerbates the problems associated with the case backlog, causing an even more excessive and unacceptable time associated with case investigation, resolution, or adjudication. We've always hoped for an equitable system that is fair, consistent, and timely. Interesting, I've been apprised of a case that has taken over a year to investigate, yet still hasn't been adjudicated, and has caused unnecessary disruption to numerous work locations. The excessive delays in adjudicating an act of misconduct causes the accused to perceive a lack of importance or significance for both their alleged offense as well as the consequences for the alleged offense. Further, consequences exist where supervisory personnel perceive a lack of support for addressing acts of misconduct, causing indifference and ultimately failing to act as a deterrent to other department members. Additionally, I've been apprised of a conflicting direction given by PSD relative to the issuance of disciplinary action. For example, an investigative report was sent to PSD from the investigating officer, and based on the facts determined through the investigation, PSD decides on a proper course of disciplinary action, which is communicated back down to that immediate supervisor, who is ultimately charged with the responsibility to impose discipline. Subsequently, once the discipline was imposed, the course of action was then reversed and reduced by PSD without discussions of any of the concerns with the investigating officer. Of greater concern, though, is the perception that PSD has not severed its ties to the operations office. As you're all aware, the decision to make PSD an independent body that reports directly to the fire chief will provide for that transparent process that we need, removing inappropriate influence from the LAFD chain of command. The COA still has concerns that the PSD is not acting independently without operations influence. The Chief Officers Association has always been committed to a team-oriented, cooperative, and collaborative relationship with the department to improve the working conditions for all LAFD members. We will continue to work with our stakeholders to improve the system and achieve success with all the recommendations contained in the audits. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chief Miller. Before we go to questions, I would certainly want the department and the commission president, if there's anything about Chief Miller's statement that you would like to respond to, we would of course want to hear that.
To begin with, Chief Miller brings up points that the department is aware of, and as both he and Chief Terrazas have put forth, we have a long way to go in the continued development of the Professional Standards Division, its practices, its policies. Many of the things that are being discussed are in labor discussions at this time. The department has not, in effect, unilaterally put forth the PSD practices and policies because they are tied to further labor discussions. And so we are aware of what Chief Miller has brought up, and we are actively looking at those internally because, as Chief Terrazas had said, PSD does have a ways to go in its development. We are creating new practices and policies that have not been in place before, and we ultimately do want, and I think all department members do want, a fair and consistent system that is transparent. So we will be working in that direction with all parties.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, the Board of Fire Commissioners also is aware of this, as in the past, Chief Miller made the board aware of this. And what we have asked for at our second meeting in October, in order to give the department time to respond in writing rather than verbally, we have asked for transparency. We've asked for those things that the commission has jurisdiction over and purview to, which are the policy issues. And we are asking that that information be presented at our second meeting in October so that we can make sure that we can at least reconcile what the Professional Standards Division is doing and what the Chief Officers Association feels needs to be done more quickly, more efficiently, in response to the guidelines and the things that the Professional Standards Division should be doing as it related to the audit. And the second thing, we haven't talked about that yet, and we haven't come to that, but this is why the Commission believes that it's so important to have that independent auditor or independent assessor that we're looking at creating that position, because that's where you have the checks and balances. When you have these kinds of things that happen, and you need to have someone to look into them. If you have someone who really and truly has the independence to do that kind of thing, doesn't report to the fire chief, but reports directly to a commission, then you have someone who can then go through and do that. And I think, Councilman Weiss, you were suggesting that it be someone that have a legal background, which we said to you that we would think about, and I believe now that you were correct in that assessment, that we need someone in that position. But that's why we think it's important to continue to move forward with the independent assessor. Because what you have here is you need to have someone who has checks and balances and can look at these things and try to and ascertain how we can get those issues resolved.
Thank you for that. Mr. Reyes had some questions.
Yeah, first, it's good to see some traction here. There's some actual movement in terms of a direction that hopefully stimulates the level of confidence to everyone in the department. My question is there, in these processes and all these procedures that are being developed, is there room for, or is it being contemplated to have because it sounds to me there's a lot of top-down type of movement within this work that you're presenting. Is there any flexibility for bottom-up folks that are entry-level, people that are beginning, folks that aren't part of the culture yet, quote-unquote, to have input to look at what makes a healthier department? Is there any thought of that type in terms of your analyzing the structures and the different checks and balances that you're looking at? Is there any discussion of that type?
And I'll let Chief Terrazas elaborate more on this. In the disciplinary process, as he referred to earlier, they're developing the supervisor level training, and they put together a pilot for our Division 1, which is basically the Metro West LA area. And through that pilot, they're seeking input from all the supervisors within that region, which are the first level supervisors, the battalion chiefs, assistant chiefs, and trying to develop a better best practice out of that trial program. And this will ultimately be our disciplinary processes and procedures that will be given to all supervisors, as Chief Terrazas had referred to, toward the end of the year. Through now, kind of in a broader sense, the stakeholders over time had been involved in the audit in general, as I know you're aware of, and they have. In those structured meetings, as well as over time, continue to give voice to their constituents' issues, as well as issues in a broader sense. So that is and has continued to occur.
But I think, Councilman Reyes, that needs to be beefed up. The stakeholders meet quarterly. And I think that what the department is doing, and I think what they're looking at, is what you're asking. I believe, because I want to have transparency in this committee, I do not believe that we have that in place as much as we should have that. So it's not just the supervisors. In the stakeholders process, we had firefighters, we had employee organizations, we had labor, we had management, we had supervisors, but that group only meets quarterly. Gotcha. We will be meeting the first week in October. We have a quarterly meeting where some of these issues will be raised. But I think that what you've pointed out to me today is that we need to talk in that stakeholders group about how we, in fact, make sure that we're getting more regular input, as you're saying, from the firefighters, from the employee organizations. So I don't want us to sit here and tell you that we have that worked out as well as the commission or the department would like for it to be worked out. Does that?
No, I appreciate that.
Okay.
As a deputy, when Jackie Goldberg was going through that process, and this was 15 years ago,
Right.
I feel like we've been kind of running in place. I mean, these types of discussions were occurring then. And here we are 15 years later. And we're at the same place. It seems to me, just because a lot of good things were said, but what really happened, what really percolated throughout the department, and what was felt from the bottom in terms of your entry-level positions throughout, it's like a stagnation given whatever culture exists there. That, how do you start breaking that up? How do you start making it much more fluid so that it can be absorbing the type of advice that makes it a healthier department for everyone, regardless of race or gender? And that's what I was trying to understand. So I appreciate your input, Commissioner. I think the supervisory level is important, but I still think what's underneath that, because these are your future leaders. I mean, these are the folks who will be in management staff or high union positions 15 years from now. And how have they been trained? And what was their orientation? And I think the shift has to occur now so that we're not 15 years later asking the same kinds of questions at the same place and without that impact.
You know what, Councilman Reyes? I don't know that we're asking the same kinds of questions. I think where we're making progress is this. I think that what the commission recognizes and what the department recognizes, first of all, is a culture change is really and truly much more difficult than people perceive it to be.
Yes.
The commission's interest is in the training of those people who are going to be in future leadership positions.
Exactly.
And the training has to be very different. We're not talking about training people on the operational side. We are actually talking about training people so that they understand that when you are supervising personnel, there are certain kinds of training and certain kinds of things that you have to have if you're talking about transformational leadership that's going to transform an institution.
Right.
It's that training that I believe that is going to make the difference between what happened 13 years ago, when I think what happened was people paid attention, then all of a sudden people, with all due respect, stopped paying attention, and there wasn't a lot of progress made. Now what the commission is doing, and I believe that the department actually has partnered with us, and I really believe that we are all working collaboratively so that training has to be very different. Our impression, or I should say my impression speaking for the commission is, right, and I'm sure that it's not lost on anybody what my background is, I don't believe you manage people. I believe you manage systems, you manage paper, you manage lots of other things, but when you are talking about leading people, there's a special kind of training that has to happen, and you have to model it, and you have to demonstrate it, and you have to be able to understand what those principles are, to be able to talk to your people so that culture shift actually happens.
Right.
That's what we're in the process of doing right now, and quite frankly, Councilman Reyes, it is not as easy,
I know,
as we perceived it to be. No, I want to say to you, this is not as easy as I even perceived it to be, and that is not because I believe that the fire department is resistive. It is because the culture has been such for, 100 years, quite frankly. But I think that progress with what Chief Miller is saying, I do believe that progress is being made, but it's probably not going to happen as quickly as any of us really would like to see it happen. I'd like to see it happen, tomorrow.
Right, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm hoping perhaps maybe the stakeholder structure lends itself to permeate the other tracks that seem to be evolving, to the extent that we allow a fresher point of view, allow for some boldness to give it an opportunity to express change that allows the elimination of the punitive and the hostile environments that has been stated throughout. And I think that's the kind of change that'll make it a healthier city. I mean, I just think of just the basic notion, when there's a fire in the community and a person doesn't speak English, I mean, these are seconds that are important for the firefighter and the person that we're helping. I mean, these are real end results of what could occur. So I appreciate the hard work, and I'm glad we're having these kinds of discussions, because I think we should try to get the magnifying glass and see, okay, how do we help you, the commission, as a council? How do we support, all the different stakeholders and departments so we can have a healthier one? So thank you for your hard work.
You're welcome.
Mr. Smith.
Yes, Commissioner, your comments sound almost like exactly the conversation I had with Chief Mack about a year and a half ago on the issue of leadership. So, Chief, we had some discussions about professional training, leadership training. What is the status of that?
What we have been doing in our training bureau is assessing leadership programs over the course of, obviously, since we had our meeting, and we were doing it at that time. What we are structuring is basically what we had talked about at that time, and basically a tiered approach to supervisor leadership training. There will be that training which is given to all supervisors, and if you're aware, we have approximately 800 uniform and civilian supervisors. We'll have a second tier, which is going to be for our mid-level managers, those that are just becoming to actually enter the management ranks of the department, and then an executive level. Our training bureau is presently pilot testing a basic supervisor leadership training course, which goes for approximately 1 week's time. They've done one pilot training course on it, got a lot of good feedback from a broad section of stakeholders within the department, and are now setting up the second pilot to see that what we thought would be better for the LAFD is being incorporated and can be delivered by this leadership entity. The other thing that we are also working on is a mid-level manager program that would, in essence, replicate Los Angeles Police Department's West Point. We no longer can use the name, but it would be a program very similar for our mid-level managers, again, giving them the leadership concepts and philosophies that they need to truly understand their role in the organization, as well as how to be good leaders and supervisors within our organization and help manage the department. So that one is well under its way also. We have the other pieces that we are still looking at for executive level managers. We send them to such courses as Harvard and other academias, which obviously give our top level executives that exposure to the greater management community, and obviously expand best practices from a broad brush of what is occurring in our nation. So those programs are under development. We talked about them last year. We're encouraged because, as was said earlier, we're trying to infuse leadership in all areas. Our HR folks for years have been introducing it at the academy level, because we agree with your premise. Leaders are everyone. Everyone is a leader, and that's why we actually began introducing leadership concepts in the drill tower, and then continue it through there. And so, kind of going back to Councilman Reyes' comment earlier, we do try to get to all levels in the organization and develop in them the leadership thought and principles at an early age or an early stage in their career.
Okay. Chief Miller, the case you brought to our attention about the 1 year time frame, do you think that's an anomaly created by the vacuum from change to one system to another, or is this a problem that may be resulting from the new program that needs to be resolved?
Councilmember, I think it's a combination of both. I think it is an anomaly, but I think that it is something that could have and should have been handled in a lot shorter time frame.
Okay. And they're aware of that case? So
the professional standards is aware of it. Yes.
Okay, very good. Chief Drosten, do you want to say something?
I'm not personally aware of that, the particulars of that case, the one that Chief Miller is referring to. I will say I agree it is an anomaly. We have very few that come close to statute. We're trying to keep way ahead of the curve. And there's one, I don't want to share confidential information. I would be speculating.
Okay. And the last question is, Chief Terrazas, have you included the employee unions, UFLAC, and COA in the training so they understand the system you're putting in place as well? Will they be?
Councilman Smith, yes, we've We met on a regular basis when we were developing the procedure to do investigations. In the 40-hour class that we recently conducted, UFLAC was given the opportunity to present 1 hour of training on any topic they wanted to talk about. We did, I believe we offered COA. John, do you recall that?
We were provided the opportunity to, a time slot to speak, but we weren't provided a spot to participate in the training, although there were some of my members that did participate in the training.
With all due respect, Councilman Smith, I think what you're saying is what we're going to be taking up in the stakeholders meeting, and that is whether or not the department has a diversity of opinion before things have been formulated. And I think that is still a work in progress. That's the Commission's perspective on that, because I believe that was the intent of your question.
Right.
Not whether or not they sat in on the training, but did they
and also eventually they have to represent those people, and they need to know how the system works. So I think they need to be at some point given the same training so they understand your system when they have to represent the employees before the system.
And actually to have an opportunity to comment upon
Right.
the system before
Certainly.
the system is up and running.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that still needs to be worked on. If we're, we need to be transparent about all of these things.
If I could add to that, Councilman, the system we're currently testing right now in Division 1 was the one that we met and conferred upon and agreed upon. So they've had some significant positive contributions, because you're right, unless we're on the same page, this is not going to work. Just this morning, I was at Division 1 headquarters getting some personal feedback on how we can make the system better. And we're making modifications daily and sometimes hourly. So I think that is a tribute to the cooperative spirit of labor management.
Very good.
We appreciate the update and appreciate the commitment to listen to the, continued commitment to listen to the employee organizations. There is one additional public comment card. You can all have a seat. Ms. Chris Mattson has put in a card. Gonzalez,
Thank you.
there's a card for Ms. Mattson. Is there a timing issue?
Yeah, well, John White, City Clerk, Ms. Mattson requested to speak on items 1 and 2. So with that, do you want to allot her 4 minutes for her time?
Sorry, Councilman Weiss, Steve Tubbs is here who represents you, maybe if he might, do you have?
Oh, he knows how to make them when he wants to, is the thing, so. Do you think I didn't notice him?
You must have very long commission meetings. You coax people to speak.
This is labor management.
I think it's a fuller discussion, we don't miss it.
More robust.
There you go.
He has his First Amendment right not to speak. All right, we'll hear Ms. Mattson first.
Could I just say something first? I just put the items 1 and 2 so that it would be 2 minutes, because last time you told me I was restricted to 2 minutes, so I just wanted to, I won't
Take
even
your time,
probably
Ms. Mattson.
speak for 2
No
minutes.
problem. Take your time.
So, I didn't mean for.
No, it's quite all right. You take your time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity of being here. My name is Chris Mattson, and my husband worked for the LAFD for more than 30 years. We have a son on the job over at Fire Station 3. He's been on the job for over 5 years, and I consider myself a very loyal LAFD wife and mother. I love the LAFD, I love the members, and that's why I'm here. A major problem with the LAFD under former Fire Chief Bamatri and current Fire Chief Berry is that upper management fails to put in place necessary policies and procedures. Management fails to enforce the policies and procedures that are in place, and management fails to update and revise outdated policies and procedures when necessary. This has caused and continues to cause firefighters to be falsely accused and unjustly disciplined. I was waiting for Chief Terrazas or someone to mention the first Board of Rights, or one of the first Board of Rights hearings under the Professional Standards Bureau. And so I have brought to you today the findings of facts in that Board of Rights hearing, where a firefighter with over 5 years on the job was being recommended for termination for failing to maintain his EMT certification, and the Board of Rights found him not guilty on all charges. Why is this important for worker welfare and, most importantly, public safety? Because the LAFD does not have any policy and procedure in place for firefighters to maintain EMT certification. At least that's what the finding of facts appear, and I'm leaving you with this. I could be wrong, but maybe you'd like to ask them, the department, Chief Terrazas and Chief Berry, about that. Also, I was here another example, I was here in June, and I've been speaking on this issue since 2004 about the outdated, defective, and discriminatory substance abuse policy. In 2006, I made a recommendation in writing to UFLAC that a first step in correcting this would be to sign a letter of intent to go into their current memo of understanding. I sent a copy to Chief John Miller. Thank God for Chief John Miller. He did sign a letter of intent for a new substance abuse policy that's in their current MU. Negotiations were to have started in June 2007. So far, there's no new policy. I'd also like to recommend former Assistant Chief Tom Curry, who scored #1 on the battalion chief exam, scored #1 on the assistant chief exam. When he retired, he is the only former fire commissioner who was a sworn member. He's now testifying. He testified at this Board of Rights hearing for this firefighter as an expert in discipline. He's also testifying, for your information, in lawsuits now with firefighters who are suing the city, who former Chief Curry feels that they were unjustly disciplined. I would recommend that you to have an unbiased member tell you about discipline prior and previous. He's considered an expert on discipline. He was the executive officer in the operations department for years. I'm sure he would be happy to testify on his expert experience with the new Professional Standards Bureau if you'd invite him. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Ms. Mattson. Does that conclude public comment today? Apparently it does. Okay. Appreciate the update, and we appreciate that you are all continuing to work hard to iron out the understandable issues and disagreements. And we'll let the Audits Committee know what you said. Anyway, that concludes that. And I think that concludes our hearing today, Mr. White.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve.